The following is a production of Professor Robert Barnwell. Each episode includes insights provided by the chairman, CEOs, and CFOs of the world's most successful corporations, as well as thought leaders from premier business schools and international consultancies. If you and your team would like more information on corporate leadership and strategic management, or would like to learn more about Professor Barnwell, his research, and how he may be able to assist your company, please visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com.
Hello, and welcome to CFO Talk Radio. I'm your host, Robert Barnwell. During the last episode, we spoke with CFO Magazine's executive editor, Scott Liebs, about the evolving role and demands on today's CFOs. This is episode 2, and we'll be joined by Gary Crittenden. Gary has served as the CFO to a number of corporations, including Sears Roebuck and Company, Monsanto, American Express, and as the chairman of Citiholdings and the CFO of Citigroup during the very trying times of the credit crisis of 2007 to 2009. In addition, he's also served on the board of several well-known and successful New York Stock Exchange-listed corporations. Gary has agreed to join us to talk about his career progression, the evolving role of the CFO, and how his view of the CFO's role has been shaped by his board experience. Well, Gary, welcome to CFO Talk Radio.
Thanks so much.
Well, we're really pleased that you could join us, and I'd like to start off our conversation maybe talking a little bit about your career. You began as a consultant at Bain & Company, and then eventually became CFO of a number of corporations in retail, manufacturing, and financial services, as well as a member of the board of directors of several other companies. Can you kind of walk us through your career progression, maybe up to your first CFO role and maybe beyond?
Sure, I'd be happy to. There wasn't really much change up to that first CFO role. So I graduated from BYU in 1976 and then went directly from there to Harvard Business School. And I was a summer associate at Bain in the summer of 1978 and fortunately got a full-time offer from Bain. And I spent the next 12 years there and feel very fortunate to have been there during that time. This was Bain, started kind of in the mid-'70s, and so I had a chance, to kind of grow up with the company as it grew in size. And of the 12 years that I was at Bain, I was fortunate enough to spend 5 of that in Germany, and so our family, had a really great experience outside the country, and it gave me a little bit of a feel for just how different, doing business is in different countries, and that not every country is the same, and products need to be kind of customized for those markets. So I spent, the first 12 years at Bain. During the kind of end time at Bain, the last 3 or 4 years, I focused much of my attention working with retailers. And I started working with one of the large retailers in Germany, and then when I came back to the U.S., worked with a couple of retailers in the U.S. And one of those clients happened to be Filings Basement, which anybody who kind of lives in the Northeast would know well, but Filings Basement is kind of a Boston icon, and some friends of mine were in the process of doing an IPO of that business and invited me to join with them. And so I joined originally as the senior vice president of operations, which is a pretty lofty title for a small retailer. I think we had about $400 million in revenues at the time. But senior vice president of operations. But after a few months, I became CFO of Filings Basement, and that was my first CFO role. And from there, I went to Melville Corporation. Melville was a conglomerate, a retail conglomerate that owned the drugstore chain CVS and the off-price retailer Marshalls and Linens and Things and Bob's stores and a number of Tom McCann shoes, a number of different retail chains. And Melville's performance, the stock performance, had been flat for a number of years. And during the time that I was there, we made a decision to split the company into its constituent parts. And that ended up having a very beneficial impact on the stock price as each of these businesses kind of found their own home. Some were IPO'd, some were sold as LBOs. CVS obviously became the mother company. And So I had a great experience at Melville. The company, we essentially split it up into its pieces. And then I was offered a job at Sears. And I actually started at Sears in the hardware stores division. I became president of the hardware stores division. The company had just acquired a chain out in California called Orchard Supply Hardware that was part of the hardware store group. And so my first real P&L responsibility came with that job at Sears, which was a job I very much enjoyed. And then eventually I became the CFO of Sears and was in that role a relatively short period of time, maybe a year and a half, something like that. And then took the job as CFO of Monsanto. Monsanto had at the time spun off its chemical business and had some very promising drugs in the pharmaceutical pipeline at the Searle Pharmaceutical Division. And so I joined Monsanto, and but it was at a time when I knew and they knew we needed to sell the company to get proper distribution for some of the drugs in the pipeline. So that business was eventually sold to Pharmacy Upjohn, and after it was sold, I was fortunate enough to have a good friend of mine who was about to become the CEO of American Express, Ken Chenault, call and ask me if I'd like to interview for the job there, and I spent a good 8 years at American Express, and then was finally the CFO at Citigroup beginning in 2007.
Okay, so you started off in retail, but clearly, as you mentioned, you've really had the opportunity to experience a number of different types of businesses and industries. I'm a little bit curious. You're looking at a company, either you're considering taking the new role or you've accepted the new role. What do you really need to do you feel to kind of get up to speed rapidly on this new industry, maybe get up to speed on the team that you've inherited? How do you go about maybe the first few weeks before you take the position and the first few weeks after to really get settled and up and running?
It's kind of an interesting question. There's always a risk associated with taking a new job, and there are jobs in general and there are CFO jobs. Let me just spend a minute talking about the CFO job, and then maybe I could generalize a little bit from there. Over the years, having had the opportunity to be CFO of a few different companies, I have developed a little bit of a kind of a framework for thinking about how well the function operates. And there are really four things that I think about when I evaluate the quality of how a company operates from a financial standpoint, from the perspective of the CFO. One is, how well does the company do at anticipating what's coming down the road, kind of looking around corners, and how well does the financial function help the operators of the business kind of anticipate where the future is going to be, and as a result of that, make sure we're taking the actions today to ensure that we're well positioned for whatever might come down the road. And so that kind of forward-looking capability, so not necessarily just the accounting part of the job, but how well does the company look forward is one element. Second element is how good are the financial processes? What are the systems like? How well do they operate without defects? There's lots of different parts of the financial function that require exactness and kind of what defect level they operate with. Third, what's the quality of the controls? Does it have a culture that focuses on having appropriate and tight controls to ensure that that mistakes aren't made, and that when they are made, they're recognized quickly and properly dealt with? And then finally, what's the financial development look like? Are there processes in place to develop people? And so I kind of had these four pillars that I think of as that are key to evaluating finance function. So as I look at a company from the outside, you can kind of get a sense for how the company's doing in those areas, and that's how I've thought about as you evaluate a company on the outside. And of course, no company is perfect on all of those parameters. So no company has great forward-looking people and terrific financial systems and absolutely correct controls, and also does a good job at development of people. And you can kind of get a flavor for how companies differ if you focus your attention in looking in each of those areas. And that's what I have tried to do as I have evaluated financial roles over time. More generally, just a couple of thoughts about coming into a new company. there's nothing like humility, recognizing the magnitude of what you don't know to help you start on the right foot. Usually, most companies are successful because they have done something that is different and unusual from other companies. And you have to have respect for whatever that culture might have been. At Monsanto, the culture of innovation was just outstanding. This was under Bob Shapiro's leadership, and Bob values the concept of great ideas. And the success that he had at Monsanto was continually driving towards innovation. And there are other aspects of the company that weren't as strong as that. And taking enough time before you take the job, and then after you are there, spending enough time so that you really do appreciate what makes this place unique and unusual, and kind of respecting that cultural aspect, I think is an important part of the role. One of the phrases that I have learned never to say is, "When I was at so-and-so company, we did it this way." There's just nothing. There's nothing that can get you into hot water faster with the team that's there, as when you talk about other places that might have done something better. It doesn't mean you can't take good ideas from elsewhere, but using those terms sometimes can cause people to feel like you don't fully understand or comprehend the great things they do. So you keep your head down for a while. You learn the culture. You do your level best to be a great colleague, to fit in with the people that you work with, and provide support to them in their roles. And, I think it's possible, if you do that, to have a successful transition from one company to another.
Actually, I'd like to kind of build on your last few comments. Let's say that you've looked at the four pillars. You think you've got a pretty good handle on the situation, and you think, yeah, this is a challenge that I'm prepared to meet. What do you think that the CEO and the CFO can do on behalf of one another to ease that transition? So, what can a CEO, he's bringing on a new CFO, what should he or she be prepared to do to make that transition easier? And what can the CFO do to kind of ease that relationship, with a new CEO that they may or may not have worked with in prior years?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of different things. There's no substitute for a CEO that provides support to a new CFO, visible support to a new CFO. The one thing you can be sure of when a new CFO comes to a company is that he's going to make mistakes and say some things that don't make sense in some early meetings. And having a CEO who is forgiving of the naivete that a new CFO brings into a situation and is, regardless of that, supportive and publicly recognizes the good characteristics that the CFO brings, buys the CFO a little bit of time to actually establish themselves. You need some time to be able to add value, and you have to do some of the things I talked about just a minute ago. You need to demonstrate that you've got these skills, but that only comes with time. And so having a CEO who is willing to give you the benefit of the doubt and even be publicly supportive of you in those first few months is kind of a critical aspect of making that whole process initially work. And I think from a CFO perspective, again, recognizing what you don't know early is an important thing, but being absolutely focused on supporting the CEO. There's an interesting thing, I think, in each company. Obviously, the CEO of the company has to be the company's primary cheerleader. He has to have absolute faith in the strategy, and he has to be able to articulate that well, both internally and externally. The CFO has to be absolutely kind of skeptical about everything. You know what I mean? You're paid to be a skeptic. You're paid to be pessimistic. You have to kind of critically view everything and make sure that you've taken the steps necessary and have thought through the issues that the company might face in circumstances that you might not anticipate. But and those discussions, the optimistic view of the CEO and the more conservative or maybe clearer-eyed view of the CFO need to take place in rooms not necessarily open to the public eye. But when the two of you are together, the two of you have to be lockstep partners in supporting the strategy of the company. It's just very important that partnership be very, very sound. You kind of come at the issues from two completely different directions, but you work out those differences together, and you come to a point of view that is the kind of public point of view of the company, and ensure that you can both support it and be real partners. And I've been blessed to work with some outstanding CEOs where I felt I had just a wonderful partnership with them in the development of the business.
Okay, well, we've got a lot of new regulations right now that are controlling what boards, what boards can do or what boards should be doing, who sits on the board, who shouldn't sit on the board. And then we're getting a lot more activist shareholders and activist board members. From your perspective, in addition to your role as CFO, you've also had the opportunity to serve on a number of New York Stock Exchange listed companies. How has your experience as a board member, how has it shaped your view and your role of the CFO?
Well, I think first thing I would say, I think activism is good. I mean, I think at the end of the day, they own the company. And so, listening to shareholders is a really good thing. And I frankly applaud, what's going on. And it's very important, I think, that management be sensitive to, the broad range of perspectives that are out there in the shareholder base. And obviously, at the end of the day, the management has to make a decision about what they think the right thing is to do, and they, they're hired and fired at the will of the board. But they have to make the right decision, but taking all of that kind of insight into account. So I've kind of come to a couple of conclusions. I don't think it makes sense to have CFOs serve on boards. I think CFOs provide input into the board as the board deliberates and makes its important decisions. The CFO has to be seen by the board as having that clear-eyed role that I talked about just a minute ago. The board has to know that it can absolutely rely on the things that the CFO is telling it, and that the CFO doesn't, in some way, manage the information flow to the board, but to the contrary, ensures that the board gets absolutely, rock-solid, reliable information, so that the board can make the important decisions that it makes. And so, I think we're in a time period here where the influence of shareholders is going to be positive. I think that results in higher quality boards of directors. I think that has the positive impact that CFOs have to provide excellent information to boards of directors. So I think, all of this that's going on now is a net positive, and I think it improves the game of everybody who's involved.
Okay. Well, probably because of your perception and attitude regarding the CFO role and their responsibilities towards the board and the shareholders, when Citigroup, was facing the credit crisis, as all banks were, and had issues with their portfolio, they asked you to come and accept the CFO role and help work through that crisis. And you were widely lauded for your tell it as it is style and refusal to sugarcoat your interpretation of the numbers and expectations around the credit and trading portfolio's future performance. And I imagine that experience has really, driven home a few principles that you've shaped in terms of, how should the CFO and their financial team really perform and deal in a time of crisis? Can you share some of those thoughts and that experience? Yeah,
I mean, it was obviously a very interesting time. I joined the company at a time when it had record earnings, and then I had a front row seat as in the quarters where the company had a very difficult run, and I did learn an awful lot from that process. I guess at the top of my list of things that I would think about are, we now know. Based on what's happened over the last 10 years or so, that you can have outcomes that simply are not on the chart. Do you know what I mean? That you can have areas of risk evolve. You can have losses happen in ways that simply could not be predicted and simply don't reflect what had happened historically. And I think, what that says to a CFO and by extension to a CEO is that kind of the breadth of outcomes that you have to consider as you do your planning have to be broader than we've thought about before. I mean, no one ever would have anticipated, I don't think, that housing prices could have had the consistent decline that they have had. There are obviously some people who anticipated a decline in housing prices, but I think even back in the kind of 2000, 2007, 8 period, now that housing prices have continued their decline, I think that would be a surprise to most people. And so there have been outcomes that were just so far outside of the realm of possibility that you have to consider, and that has to be kind of fed into the process, and that then flows down in the way the function gets managed. That static planning doesn't work. You really have to have a wide range of scenarios that take into account things that are simply not viewed as realistic, and then have obviously clear, concrete plans for what you would do in the environment that would evolve in that way. And there's just none of us would have anticipated the political changes, or very few people would have anticipated the political changes that have taken place in Eastern Europe, the way the Middle East has kind of evolved over time, the way financial markets have evolved, the relative struggle that the Japanese have had over the last 20 years, the impact of the housing bubble in the United States, the impact of the tech bubble in the early part of this decade. These are just things that were off the charts for people. And boy, I tell you, when you live upfront and close, off the chart events, things that simply haven't ever happened before, you develop a healthy respect for the kind of breadth of planning that's required to ensure that you have the ability to deal with it. And so, if there's a lesson learned for me, it's probably that one.
All right. Well, Gary, many thanks for joining us today, and I hope you'll agree. Join us again sometime.
Terrific. Nice to be with you.
Okay. Thanks so much. That was Gary Crittenden talking about his career progression, the evolving role of the CFO, and how his view of the CFO's role has been shaped by his own board experience. Please join us for our next episode when we speak with Jeremy Hope, author of Reinventing the CFO. Until then, this is Robert Barnwell and CFO Talk Radio wishing you all the best.
We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and found the material of value. To download a transcript of this episode, receive a free subscription to the show, or to learn more about this subject, we encourage you to visit Professor Barnwell's website at robertgbarnwell.com to explore the many executive briefings, presentations, case studies, and other resources available for immediate download. This has been a production of Robert G. Barnwell. All rights reserved.